How's it going? Going good? We have one good. I'm satisfied. Satisfied, it's good enough. Look at this thing, it's got this alien geometry and I can't figure out what it's supposed to be. Oh, something like that. Okay, how are we going? We have sound? No sound.
Yes.
Now we have sound. Okay, now we have sound. All right, so we've been looking through the Honey Cake Sutta, Majjhima number 18. For those of you who are joining us online, I don't know if I can give you a copy here or maybe hold it up here, or you could even go to Sutta Central and if you just go to Sutta Central and then write in the search bar MN18, then you should get it. That's how that's supposed to work. Yesterday, we looked at the introduction to the Honey Cake Discourse, and we saw that it involved the Buddha up in his home country, the land of the Sakyans, and then he met his perhaps uncle, perhaps father-in-law, perhaps both, Dandapani, and had an encounter with him, which seemed sort of unusually obstreperous. And Dandapani greeted the Buddha not so much like a reverential family member might be expected to, but more like Basil Fawlty. What? I'm going to England for the first time in a few days, and I asked the person, my friend there, can we go and visit the Fawlty Towers place? I'm not sure if we'll get to see it, but anyway. Okay. Then when then the Buddha gave a teaching about non-conflict, about resolving conflict, and then Dandapani waggled his tongue and so on and departed, leaving on his staff. And I think that's as far as we got. Is that right? I think that's as far as we got. Right. Okay. Oh, by the way, crikey isn't a Buddhist term, it's an Australian term, so it doesn't have like a particular doctrinal meaning. Okay. Hey, how would somebody like to read this out? Oh, you want to just do the next paragraph? I'll start with then in the late afternoon and do that paragraph in the next one.
Then in the late afternoon, the Buddha came out of retreat and went to the banyan tree monastery, sat down on the seat spread out, and told the mendicants what had happened. When he had spoken, one of the mendicants said to him, "But sir, asserting what doctrine does the Buddha not conflict with anyone in this world with its gods, maras and divinities? This population with its ascetics and Brahmins, its gods and humans? And how is it that perceptions do not underlie the Buddha? The Brahmin who lives detached from sensual pleasures, without indecision, stripped of worry, and rid of craving for rebirth in this or that state."
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you so much. So as often happens, so this is something also just to notice the something about culture and how it works there. The Buddha's coming back, telling everybody what's happened. And then what do? They ask questions. Okay. So much of Buddhism comes from people asking questions. So I want to just give a special thanks to all of the people here who have asked questions and to respect them for doing that. And no matter how stupid they are, even if they're like really, really stupid, like incredibly stupid, but still, not really. All questions are very wise and very interesting, okay? And they help me to understand, and they help you to understand, and they help others to understand as well. So the culture of asking questions is a culture which is fundamental to Buddhist teachings. Somehow, in the years since then, it has really drifted out so that in a lot of traditional Buddhist cultures, nobody asks any questions anymore, which I feel is a big mistake. Yeah, it's got a very culturally pervasive. I was taken once, I had a minor sickness or something. I was taken once to the health clinic and the doctor prescribed me some pills. And when he gave me this bottle of pills, I said, oh, what's in that? He just looked at me and said, you're the first person who's ever asked me that. And the guy I was with, the Thai guy I was with, just laughed and he said, oh yeah, he said Thai people like medicine. If it's medicine that's good, then they'll have it. Yeah. So, asking questions. Who would like to read the next paragraph? Thank you.
Mendicant judgments driven by proliferating perceptions misled the person. If they don't find anything worth approving, welcoming, or getting attached to in the source from which these arise, just this is the end of the underlying tendencies to desire, repulsion, use, outlook, and deceit, the desire to be reborn in future things. This is the end of taking up the rod and the sword, the end of quarrels, arguments, and disputes, of accusations, devices of speech, and lies. This is where the bad unspeakable law is seized without getting the culture.
Excellent. Sadhu. And would anybody like to read them just in one next paragraph? Go on.
The discourse is without sex, but we have spoken the body of God and peace and
Okay, very good. Okay, so let's consider this little episode. A curious little episode. Okay, so they ask for a clarification, and the Buddha expands on his initial statement to some degree, but expands on it with a statement that is hardly any less obscure. This is not really common for the Buddha. Okay? Normally Buddha's style was that he would try to make things as clear as possible. In fact, I think that this was a distinctive personal style which he had, which he developed in direct sort of reaction against the Vedic culture which preceded him. If you look in the Vedas, the ancient Indian religious poetry, religious hymns, which predate the Buddha by 500 years or 1,000 years, the Vedas are deliberately obscure to an astonishing degree. And it's not just obscure because they're old, they're obscure because the poets deliberately and self-consciously harnessed every possible poetic device they could in order to make them as obscure as possible. Right? So they are very difficult literature to read and to study. I've been reading a recent translation by Jamison and Brereton, which is a fantastic translation. And it's just astonishing, like the way that they will work by, like they won't mention the subject of the hymn. It's only implied because of a metaphor, which is then shared with something somewhere else. And then they'll, oh, amazing. Why do they do all this, right? Because the gods love hidden things. Yeah? The gods love hidden things. When you do it in that obscure way, you're keeping all the knowledge in your group. Only serious experts could ever have understood that poetry. It's not just today that it's hard to understand. Even in those days, you had to really know all of that literature and everything to be able to understand it. The gods love hidden things. And they say this is not just an inference from it. This is what they say, the gods love hidden things. So the idea is that the truth is something which is secreted away in the invisible connections and the invisible links between them. And so to express the truth meant that in some way you had to be able to speak without speaking, to say words without actually saying anything. And so that literature developed in this highly elusive and obscure style. Now, when the Buddha came along, he wanted to make things as clear as possible. And it's honestly really quite dramatic if you compare the Buddhist literature with the pre-Buddhist literature, that all of the sort of the obscurantisms and all of the playing around and messing around and so on is gone, and the Buddha tries to be as explicit as possible, tries to bring everything into the daylight and make it clear. That's part of the character of the Buddha's teachings. So here constitutes somewhat of an exception to that, or at least apparently so, because the Buddha is using language in a complex way and expressing himself in a way which seems calculated to remain obscure. Right? He could have explained this all much more clearly, but he seems that he didn't want to. But anyway, let me go and see, analyze this passage. So I'm looking at the last paragraph on the first page, and I'm going to go through and analyze this passage as best we can, remembering that there's more analysis to come. So I'm not going to go through everything, but just to sort of get an initial scan of the text. So the first sentence, judgments driven by proliferating perceptions beset a person. Okay, so this is probably the most important sentence in the whole sutta. Judgments driven by proliferating perceptions beset a person. So the word I'm translating as judgments here is in Pali sankhara, which literally means calculations, evaluations, assessments, right? Yeah, so you could translate it as assessments, but usually when we're assessing people, we usually say we're judging people, so I use the word judgments, something like that. So judgments, assessments, calculations, estimations.
Is the same as sankhara?
No, different word. Similar sound, different word. So sankhara literally means to count, to calculate. Yeah. Right? Yeah.
What is beset?
What does what say? Beset. It's falling down on me. You're being swamped by it. You're being overwhelmed by it. Yeah. It's happening to you. Yeah. Too much. It's like opening up Facebook. All those notifications beset me. Okay. Pali is samudāya charanti, incidentally. Anyone else before we go on? Good, okay. Judgments driven by proliferating perceptions. So the Pali here is papancha sanya sankhara, which is, it's a difficult compound to break up, and different translators have analyzed it in different ways, but for various complicated reasons that I won't get into here, mainly because I forget what they are, then this is how I've broken it up. But proliferating perceptions. So the word for proliferation is in Pali papancha. Okay, and proliferation means, well, it means basically what you've been doing for the whole of this retreat, pretty much. Thoughts going a million different directions at once. That's proliferation. Question? Papancha. Papancha. Okay. Right. So papancha is the most important term in this particular sutta. And in fact, this sutta first became famous in modern times due to the book Concept and Reality, written by a Sri Lankan monk called Katu Kurunde Nyanananda. And he published this book. It was his PhD thesis, and one of the most influential books in modern studies of early Buddhism. And in Concept and Reality, he sort of went into depth into this word papancha in this context and other contexts, and sort of teased out exactly what the meaning of it. Previously, the meaning of it had been quite obscure because it doesn't occur all that often. And so he showed that the word papancha is essentially when your concepts get out of control, when your thinking gets out of control. So thinking by itself is fine. When you're thinking, you're thinking about something, it's constructive and it has a purpose. So that's part of the wholesome development of meditation, part of the Noble Eightfold Path. Second factor of the Noble Eightfold Path, right thought. Okay, so thinking isn't the problem. what's a problem is when your thinking gets out of control because it's driven by conceit and views and desires and all of these things. And that's proliferation. So this whole sutta is talking about how proliferation happens. Okay, so okay, before I go on, any questions on that? Good. Proliferating yeah.
In this piece, is this something that Buddha says back to the
That's correct, yeah. So this is the Buddha's answer to the question. Yeah. Okay. So the next one is perceptions. We talked about perceptions a little bit earlier, but just to reiterate, so perceptions are the function of the mind that clumps the raw data of experience into recognizable and useful wholes. So instead of seeing just light and color, which is what my eyes see, we see doors and floors and ceilings and so on. And when we can recognize things, that means we can operate, we can live. All right. Now, perception is actually incredible. Perception works really fast and incredibly accurately all the time. And we are constantly walking around and recognizing things and not walking into them. Thank you, perception. We are constantly able to get our fork at the dinner table and then not try to eat the table. And we eat the food instead. Thank you, perception, right? And all of these kinds of things. So perception is what's organizing the world into a meaningful whole. When perception starts to break down, you notice how the world becomes a little bit more distressing when perception starts to break down. Simple example would be you travel to a country where you don't speak the language and the road signs no longer make sense. Right? And you realize, oh, you're living in a world that's a bit less meaningful than what you're thinking, but what you used to think it was. Sometimes perception makes mistakes. And sometimes you think somebody is something, and it's something else. So when I was younger, I wasn't always shaven. You know, I used to have long, luscious hair, and I was driving my car, sitting at the traffic lights, and these guys pulled up next to me, and they were wolf whistling and cat calling me and so on. And I turned around, and they're like, "Oh, geez, it's a bloke." Perception, right? So perception perception is incredibly helpful and absolutely essential, but because it evaluates the world in terms of what is known, in terms of what is in the past, in terms of what is liked and disliked, good and bad. So therefore, it tends to be introducing already a kind of a subtle distortion and subtle shift in experience. Right? Not bad, but it's susceptible to being corrupted in them. And so here, these proliferating perceptions are getting out of control. And they beset a person. And we're going to look a bit more into the psychology of this a bit later on. But notice how the person in this sentence is the object. Right? The thoughts and things are, they're happening to you. And I talked a little bit about this in the talk the other day. And so this is one of the suttas where I sort of got this idea from and sort of got this understanding from. And so we have like a person, right? We'll again consider a bit more about that, who that person is. But there's a person, right, who I see myself as, who I perceive myself as, and these things are sort of happening to you. All right. If they don't find anything worth approving, welcoming, or getting attached to. So this phrase is approving, welcoming, and getting attached to refers to a gradual process of like desire and attachment. So it's like, it's a bit hard to capture in the translation, but it's like approving is like, and then welcoming is like, yes, yes. And then getting attached to it is like, yes, yeah. Right? So it's the whole process, like, hi, yes, come in. Yeah, now I've got you. Now you can't go out. Okay. So this is what that process is, yeah. So if they don't find anything approving, welcoming, or getting attached to in the source from which these arise. So the source from which these judgments arise, what is that source? The Buddha doesn't tell us. Okay, so that one's answered a bit later on. Source from which all these things arise. So if you don't get attached to anything in the source from which all of these proliferations arise, then that's the ending of all these underlying tendencies. Yeah.
Does they refer to the judgment or to the person?
You mean from which these arise?
No, they at the start.
If they, the person, yeah. Yeah. In my translations, generally speaking, I use the neuter plural. Yeah. So yeah, it can be tripped up in cases of this. Yeah.
You said that perceptions are a function of the mind.
Yes.
I thought it was a function of the brain. So if when the brain dies, do perceptions continue with the mind, and the mind continue to form perceptions?
Okay, good question. So for those online, the question is when is the perceptions a function of the brain or a function of the mind? And when the brain dies, do perceptions continue? Mind and yes. Mind and yes. The function of the mind, and yes, they do continue.
That's clear.
Even clearer, perhaps. Yeah. Okay. First, okay, so the two questions there, okay, both of which are worth considering in some detail. So let me be a bit less facetious and a bit more. Mind and brain. But in Buddhism, the mind does not arise from the brain, and the mind is not something also that's separate from the brain, but rather the mind and brain are interdependent. And so the mind affects the brain affects the mind, right? So you can find things that correlate from one to the other, and things that influence from one to the other, but the mind causes the brain just as much as the brain causes the mind. Okay, so that's the first question. Second thing, about what happens when you die. Has anybody here, quick question, had a near-death experience? Yes, do you mind sharing it with us?
No,
Please.
I fell off a cliff. As a child, 14 years old, I was flying in June and somewhere in England, and I fell down. I barely survived it because the rock broke my fall after through.
Okay.
Same thing happened when I falling from a tree.
Okay.
Same thing happened when I fall from a ruin somewhere in Turkey. So
this is why you've come to learn mindfulness, is that right?
Everything goes really fast. You tend to develop a sense of sensory speed that is quite usual.
Right. Yeah. Did you like die and cross over to the other side or anything like that? No, not that one. Not yet. Keep working on it though.
Different kinds of psychedelic comments.
Different kinds of psychedelic comments, yeah. I also had a similar experience like that with, except I wouldn't fall off a cliff so much as drive a car off the cliff. But yeah, the same kind of thing where you realize that your senses start working in overtime and you have extremely vivid impressions about what's happening. Okay, so let me describe very simply kind of a common kind of out-of-body experience or near-death experience. Okay? This is kind of, so many accounts of this. So I'm not going to go over all the accounts and evidence and counter-evidence and so on, but just look at how, what I want to do is look at how we would understand that from a Buddhist point of view. All right? So first thing is, well, you die, so there's that. Then you rise up out of your body. Okay, this is how it's reported. Okay, you rise up out of your body. Fine. And you feel good. Okay? You feel great, in fact. And maybe you see people crying, your family crying, or something like that, and you're like, "What are you crying for? I feel great." And then you move towards maybe a light or something like that, and often you like recognize, say, deceased family members or something like that, who you encounter on your journey. And then there comes a moment where you make a choice, right? And you make a choice: am I going to keep going, or am I going to come back? And so typically people who tell these stories are the ones who decided to come back. Usually they feel like they've got some kind of unfinished business or something like that, so they turn around and come back. And they invariably describe these experiences as being extremely clear. Like it's not just like a dream or something like that. It's an extremely clear and vivid experience. So that's a kind of classic near-death experience. Now, if we analyze that experience in terms of the 5 aggregates, all right? So the first thing is that you rise up out of your body. So if you're coming out of your body, you have a point of view. The point of view is a physical property. Movement is a physical property. Being able to see is a physical thing. So that means there's some kind of physical dimension or rupa involved. And in Buddhism, we call that rupa the Sukhama rupa, or the Manomaya Kaya, the mind-made body. I'm going to talk more about this later. But there's some kind of energy body or something like that. I'm not going to try to define it in physical terms or anything, but something like that, because you have position. Only physical things have position. Mental things don't have position. So you rise out of your body, then you feel good. Oh, that's Vedana. It's the second one of the 5 aggregates. You're feeling. And you recognize people from the past. Recognition is perception. So you have perception. Then you make a choice. Am I going to return? That's sankharas. That's the 4th one of the 5 aggregates. You're now going to make a decision to return. And then everything is very clear in awareness. This is your consciousness. So this process of out-of-body experience involves all of the 5 aggregates. And these are all part of what that process is. Okay. Yeah.
Is the account detailed in the Tibetan Book of Dead similar to that with early Buddhist?
So it's the account in the it's the account in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, similar to that in early Buddhist texts. So the account I just told you now is not from early Buddhist texts. That's from modern accounts of near-death experience. Okay, in the early Buddhist texts, it doesn't really talk about it in much detail. Like there are a few kind of remarks and things like that, but it doesn't really go into a lot of detail. But the account in the Tibetan Book of the Dead is somewhat similar, but also quite a lot more detailed and a lot more specific, and there's a lot more in there as well. But it's not too dissimilar. Yeah. So again, I'm not trying to do I'm not trying to prove that this is what happens or anything like that. I'm just trying to point out that the way people talk about these experiences actually involves all of the 5 aggregates. Yeah. Yeah.
That process, and then the person making the decision to go back. Is there an analogy or an extension of that in Buddhism for going to the next life versus not going to the next life?
Sure, yeah. So in the Majjhima Nikaya, you have the Sankhara Sutta, which is basically making a rebirth according to a sankhara, to a wish or a volition or a choice. So if your karma is sufficient, then you can make a choice to get reborn, or you can stop making choices and not getting reborn.
Is that at the same point where the decision is made to go back? Like,
I think you can make the decision anytime. Like you can make the decision now. You know, I mean, it's like any kind of decision, right? I mean, you could make the decision to whatever, go and eat at McDonald's when you finish the retreat. You can make the decision now. Doesn't really matter if you make it now or you make it on the way to McDonald's. I'm sorry, that was unnecessary. I don't know why I thought of McDonald's.
But also make a decision to go back when you have a near-death experience. You can also decide that earlier, but there's one point at which that decision is made. Right?
Typically, when people describe near-death experiences, that's a sort of classic decision, it's a classic process, but there's a lot of variation also. Right? So people sometimes, I suspect, you know, they're the cases that we hear about. You know, if somebody has much more clear karma that's going to take them on to rebirth or whatever, then you're not going to have that kind of process. And so we hear about them because they're like that. Okay, yeah.
If I understand well, does that mean that when we die, in this case, we just get rid of the physical body, the rupa, physical rupa,
Olarika Rupa.
we're supposed to take everything else with us, including the recognition of the past family members.
Right. Exactly, yeah. It's quite a lot, isn't it? That would be that whole attachment thing, right? That's where we're taking all of our attachments with us, yeah. Right? It's quite a burdensome journey in one way. Yeah. Yeah.
So the question, what is consciousness and how was it born?
What is consciousness and how was it born? It's first of all, just let me say how much I love being a Buddhist monk. It's awesome. People ask me these kinds of questions. Great. What is consciousness? So, according to in Buddhism, when we use the word consciousness, we're translating the Pali word vijnana. And so the use of the word consciousness in Buddhism is somewhat specialized. It's not exactly the same as consciousness in general psychology, right? So we're translating the word vijnana, which has the meaning of awareness. So vijnana means pure awareness as distinct from the things of which you're aware and as distinct from the things that make awareness possible. So our mind has a very complex structure, and we have emotions, we have memories, we have intentions, we have feelings, we have all of those things going on in our mind all the time in a complex interrelated network. And the awareness of all those things is the vijnana, consciousness. Does that make sense? And well, the second question is a bit easier. Where was it born? It wasn't. It just keeps going. And it continues, and it is conditioned. We can say that consciousness is born on specific occasions from specific causes, which actually we'll talk about a bit later on in the sutta. But consciousness as a whole is a stream that keeps going through the whole of samsara.
The creator.
The creator. Is it the creator? No, there's no creator in Buddhism. The Buddha said that the first beginning of things is not knowable.
Sorry, please repeat.
The first beginning of things is not knowable.
No.
Not knowable. It's not noble. No, it's not knowable.
And all.
And noble, I guess, yeah.
Is the consciousness only individual?
Is consciousness only in the...
Individual.
Is consciousness only individual? Yes. Yes.
If consciousness is not seen as born, does that mean it's enlightenment?
Is consciousness...
If consciousness isn't viewed as something that isn't born, does that mean it's enlightenment because it's not prone to that?
Well, no, I mean, consciousness gets born and dies all the time. Right? But when does the process of it getting born and die begin? Then to that, there's no answer. Is it enlightenment? No. Because it's still conditioned. Yeah.
I've got two questions. So, from one consciousness, you cannot have two later.
That's correct. You can't split. That was that movie. Was that movie the Little Buddha or something like that? And they split consciousness into three people. That was Harry Potter.
But the second question is about perceptions. So, as you said to Melanie, so when we die, our flow of perceptions carries with the.
Yes.
So how we perceive things as beautiful or ugly, we're going to carry that.
It seems so, yeah.
Do we carry, for example, the capacity of talking foreign languages or recognizing suttas or art? Or...
Yeah, I will, yeah. So the question was, if when we die, if our perceptions and so on continue in like a conditioned stream, then are we going to have certain preferences, likes and dislikes in the next life? Let's be conditioned by that, or even maybe more complex things like remembering languages and so on and so forth. So it's a very interesting question. There's been a lot of research done on that by Professor Ian Stevenson, and he looked at questions of where biology intersects with rebirth. So this is where mostly children will get reborn and they have some kind of mark on their body that somehow connects them with their previous life. So I'll just give you an example of that. There was one story, it's been a long time since I read Stevenson's book, so I can't remember all of the details, but one story where this young kid got very excited because he saw his old home, told his mummy and daddy, oh, we have to go here, this is my old home. And so they were kind of to know what to do, and they drove him to their old home. I think, if I remember correctly, this was in Lebanon, maybe, not sure. Anyway, and he ran into the house like he owned the place and said hello to the people there, and everyone was like, what's this kid doing? And then when they kind of settled down, he told the story and about his past life and so on and so forth, and they realized that he was conceived shortly after the death of their son, his family, and they showed a picture of their son's body, and he'd been shot and he had a bullet wound over his heart, and the kid had a birthmark of the same size and shape over his heart in the exact same place. So this is that connection between biology and rebirth. And so Professor Stevenson has documented thousands of cases like this. One of the cases, which I recall just off the top of my head, was a kid who was born in Burma and had white skin and only liked drinking tea and eating white bread and eating shepherd's pie. And so it seems that he was I can't remember now, I think maybe an Englishman who died in the war or something like that. And then, so then there was that connection. So it does seem as if those kinds of preferences can come through. And I think basically any parent would know that kids are weird and they pick up all kinds of things that are really odd from like nowhere. And that suddenly one kid likes this and another one likes that. And why? You can't really always see. And obviously, a lot of the time that's just because of circumstances and conditions and so on. But it does seem as if we carry some things through. Most of the higher level things like languages and so on don't seem to really come through in the same way. Like we tend to, I think, we're spending a long time, regrowing and everything. So I think we have those more kind of basic things. A lot of things get confused and a lot of things get lost as we grow older. But there also are, occasional incidences. I mean, we've probably all heard cases where people can spontaneously speak a foreign language. That's pretty weird, isn't it? You get a bump on the head or something and you can speak Finnish. How did that happen? Right? So there are these kind of strange circumstances where more complex things seem to come through. One of the best known instances in Buddhism is the young boy named Dhammaruwan, whose recordings you can listen to on YouTube. And when he was a young boy in Sri Lanka, he would just go down to the temple and just start chanting Pali. You might say, well, nothing that unusual for a boy in Sri Lanka to know a bit of Pali and to chant a few Pali chants, and he's probably hearing people chanting Pali since before he was born. But he would chant for hours, and he would go into this trance state and just chant and chant and chant, doing all of these long, obscure Abhidharma texts, sutta texts, in a melodic style that was completely different from modern Sri Lankan chanting. And it's astonishing to listen to him because he never makes mistakes. It's just nuts. He just goes on and on for hour after hour, never making a mistake. And as someone who knows Pali, I can tell you he is absolutely chanting the text exactly and precisely, except he sometimes has a different reading in the text than our modern editions. He'll sometimes chant a word with a slightly different spelling. But when he does that, he always chants it with that same other spelling. He's not making a mistake. He had a different reading in front of him, and a reading which maybe you can't find in modern editions, and yet he will consistently chant that. So this is like another, and then later on, he gradually forgot that chanting and so on. So it does seem as if sometimes these things can happen, but obviously somewhat rare. But it's not uncommon for people to have some kind of memory of past lives. I'm betting somebody here has had one. Anyone here have a memory of a past life or know somebody who had one? Yeah. I've asked, just by the way, I've asked this question a number of times over the years, and every single time somebody's had a story just like, go on.
I have when she enters churches in France or wherever, she remembers her life from the Middle Ages.
Wow.
I don't know the details.
Okay. And even she's adult now, she can still remember.
She sees it.
Ah, wow. So that's unusual to be able to keep that in adulthood. Usually it goes away. We should get her to write it down. That's how you can test it, right? You can get to write down the details of it. Yeah. One study I read on past lives, they got a bunch of kids and they hypnotized them to recollect their past lives. And so this was a really interesting study because one of the things you recollect from your past lives is what you eat, right? So these are kids. What did they eat in their past lives? Fairy floss, candy? No, porridge. Overwhelmingly, they ate porridge and bread in their past lives. It's not something that kids are going to be fantasizing about. And one of the interesting details is that when they could recollect eating with a fork, but their forks have 2 prongs on them. Right? Modern kids have never seen a fork with 2 prongs on it, but in the Middle Ages, that was how forks worked. So sometimes these details are kind of really hard to explain. Was there another question? Was there somebody else with an experience over here? Yeah.
You can easily call that a delusion, but I went to this therapist, this hypnosis therapist that I had this experience with, which was very interesting. And it was about me about like going to India to investigate a certain site to determine the value of the site for an English trading company.
Okay.
And finding a temple there.
Okay.
And which then the locals shut down and hid from the trading company when we came back with the excavation.
Oh, that's it. It seems unusual and specific.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for that. Yeah. Did you manage to test it out? Did you find out whether it's true or not? Okay, so if you're in that kind of situation, always try to ask questions, right? So if you're in that kind of thing, maybe it's a memory, maybe it's hypnosis, maybe it's a meditation experience, you ask, oh, what's the name of the town? What's the name of the village? Right? And you try to get as much specific details like that as you can, and then you can hopefully be able to test it. Yeah.
The temple was in the middle of the jungle.
In the middle of the jungle.
There was a statue of an elephant.
Yeah.
So Indonesia or something.
Sure, yeah. Yeah. Not hugely identifying, I'm going to go on out a limb and say, a temple in the jungle in India with an elephant.
What about it was the first cave that was located beneath the temple, and that was the actual sacred site.
Now we're getting somewhere, right? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Goals?
Consciousnesses.
Is it fixed numbers or the other new ones appearing?
We got all the cool questions coming up tonight. That's excellent. Are there fixed numbers or there are more appearing? So in the suttas, it doesn't touch on that question. It doesn't say is there like a consciousness spawning point in the universe where they all just sort of come out, or like if there's a fixed number and then a certain amount of people are getting enlightened, then their consciousnesses are disappearing from samsara, then the number over time would be getting less. Yeah. Which means that if you're somebody of, one of the consequences of that for somebody of a paranoid disposition would be that they could fear that they would be left alone in samsara when everybody else has got enlightened. I knew somebody who had that fear. Yeah. They thought that they were literally, there was this person who I knew at the temple who was like a really lovely person, so kind and gentle and intelligent and all of these kinds of things. But they had paranoia, and they believed that they were such a terrible person that literally every sentient being in samsara would get enlightened and just leave them alone to be reborn in eternity alone in the whole of samsara. Yeah. It's bad, isn't it? Anyway, yes.
Isn't there in Buddhism like a meditation or something that is focused on recollecting these kind of memories from previous lives? Maybe I am wrong, but I think it's said that when the Buddha gets enlightened, somehow he can't see,
That's correct, yeah. Yeah. Okay. So the question was, is there a meditation practice in Buddhism so you can recollect these past lives? Yes, there is. So generally speaking, when it comes to past lives, there seems to be, there's a number of ways to be able to know them or be aware of them. We've discussed where children can be spontaneously aware of them. We've discussed like hypnotic regression, and so on. So there's a few things like this, but these are obviously a bit kind of dodgy, right? I mean, you can see things in hypnosis that are sometimes true and sometimes not true and so on. But in the suttas, the way of recollecting past lives is to first get fourth jhana. So the fourth absorption is a state of consciousness which is extremely profound, extremely clear. The mind is extremely bright and the hindrances are long gone. So anything which you see in that state, you see in a way that is totally pure and true and real. Your mind is totally undistorted. And so if you can recollect your past lives in that state, then you can see them much more vividly with a much greater degree of confidence. So how to do that? Basically, if you want to know the method for how to recollect things in the past life, the quick way is that you've already been doing it on this retreat. I'm going to go out on a limb and say most people on this retreat, while they're sitting there in meditation, have had a surprising memory of something that happened to them long ago that you hadn't thought of for a long time. right? Probably most people, maybe when you're a young person, maybe when you're a kid, yeah? And it just comes to you. So what's happening, your mind is becoming more clear and those memories are coming to you more vividly. That's the process of meditation. Your mind is becoming more powerful. And that's just with wherever you're at in your meditation. So when you can develop your meditation very deeply and to get a very deep absorption, then that same thing happens, but much more powerfully. And so you can invite that or develop that by like bringing your mind back to you. Ask yourself, what's your earliest memory? And then if your mind goes to that very clearly, you can ask, well, what came before that? And then you can follow that through to see where it leads. Not everyone's going to be able to do that, but some people, it seems, can.
But reaching the fourth jhana is not enlightenment.
It is not enlightenment. Yeah. Sorry?
It's like an intermediate stage or something.
You can think of it as information gathering. Right? Right? So the Buddha said, oh, this whole rebirth thing is suffering. And you're like, okay, well, this life, I can see that, there's some suffering and stuff like that, but maybe my past life, I was pretty happy. So let's check it out and see what was going on there. All right, how are we going? Yes.
Well, if somebody died and all the loved ones are alive,
right?
All his mind or line up, or is it projection of the person that is
Sorry, do I think all the mind-made bodies line up?
Yes.
What do you mean line up? What do I mean? Are they like in a line?
Or is it projection?
Okay. So the question is like, if you die, have a near-death experience or after-death experience? Should really be an after-death experience, right? Not a real death experience, afterlife experience. Anyway, and if you recognize a past family member or something like that, is that actually them manifesting in a mind-made body, or is that your projection of them? Hard to say, right? In these kinds of cases, right? That's why, like, when you're in your meditation, like, you can learn to recognize things by training and testing yourself. So when I saw my Metta teacher at Mahachachai one time, we spoke about this. I was there with another monk, and this other monk asked about this. And Chachai has told him, well, when you finish your meditation, you can ask if there are any beings who've died in this area, if you can see them. And then when you see them, then you have to ask them, like, what's your name? How did you die? Who are your family? Where did you live? All of this kind of stuff. Then after the meditation, you can then go and check and see whether there really was somebody of that name and so on and so forth. So you're actually teaching yourself to learn the difference between something that's just a projection and something that's real, right? And then my friend asked Ajahn Chachai, he said, oh, have you ever done this? He said, oh, yeah, I did it so many times I got bored. He got bored with it, moved on. Yeah. So that's how you can train yourself to see the difference between whether these things are just projections or whether they're something which is manifesting to you. But I can tell you a quick story about this, which one it is. So Carl Jung had a story about meeting his father in his afterlife. And if you know Carl Jung, you know that he was this very kind of deep thinker and kind of mystical kind of way of thinking and so on. And so his encounter with his father in his past life, I think, was kind of curiously unlike him. So anyway, it's some kind of dream or something like this. I can't exactly remember what state he was in when he had this experience. But anyway, his mother what was happening? I think his mother was on her deathbed, something like that. Mother was on the deathbed, and then he has a dream or trance or something and meets his father. And Jung's like, wow, what's it like after you die? What happens? And his father was like very uninterested in discussing anything like that. But he said to his son, he said, I hear you've become a very successful therapist. He said, that's true. He said, I hear you help many people with their problems and so on. He said, that's true. You know, your mother is about to die. He said, yes, I know. He said, you know, we had a lot of difficulties. I wonder if you could maybe give me some advice on how to get along with my wife when she comes back. All right. Yeah, please.
First of all, you say consciousness doesn't stop,
Right.
but is conditioned.
It's conditioned, yeah. The stream continues, but it's ever changing. A new consciousness arising and ceasing, but the stream of consciousness continues. Yeah.
I've changed it.
But right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. And then
You know, he put dependent origination in Finnegan's Wake. Yeah.
when somebody chooses to die,
Yeah.
will the same thing happen?
What do you mean by chooses to die?
Euthanasia,
Okay.
for instance,
Okay. What do you mean will the same thing happen?
seeing the
Oh, hard to say. I don't think, I mean,
so the chosen.
yeah, I don't think that, I mean, leaving chosen death aside, but I don't think that that experience necessarily happens for everyone. I think it happens in those accounts that we have, and even the accounts that we have actually vary a lot. There's actually a lot of different accounts, and one I gave is a fairly typical one, but there are lots of other ones as well. I think, okay, so when the Buddha talked about rebirth, one of the metaphors that he used a lot to talk about rebirth was like moving home. Actually, the past lives in Pali is pubbē nivāsa, past homes, literally. And he gave similarly, like watching people to be reborn is like if you're standing on the balcony and you watch people walking out of their home onto the street, walking down the street and walking into another house. And so he used these kinds of similes quite a lot. So like moving home. I think that's a really good way of understanding what happens when rebirth happens. Because we, for example, if we ask like, well, at what point does rebirth take place? Well, at what point do you move into a new home? I mean, it kind of depends, right? Is it when you cross the threshold? Is it when you sign the lease? Is it when you pay off the loan, right? I mean, there could be all kinds of different ways of defining when you actually move to one home. For some people, it's very straightforward. You just go from one place to another. For other people, it might take years before they really feel it. But also, like the degree of attachment that you have to a home is going to be very different. Right? If you've just moved in there and then let's say your loan falls through, well, you'll probably be disappointed. But if it's your family home that you were born and brought up in and then you lose that house in a fire in LA, then you're going to be really distraught. So the meaning of that moving home is not just one thing. Actually, it's completely different for so many people, depending on so many different circumstances. So I think that the same thing applies when you get reborn. That there's actually going to be, you know, everyone's going to be different in one way or another. Yeah. Yes.
Rebirth is like the local birds. We tend to travel with the same routes.
Oh, right, yeah.
They do not actually say.
Yeah, so the question was whether a rebirth is like a flock of birds that tend to follow the same routes. The suttas don't, I think, explicitly say exactly that, but it seems to be implied by the way that I think all forms of Buddhism really think about rebirth, because it follows your attachment, it follows what you're used to. So it tends to go to the things that are near and around you. That's when most of the time when we can, you know, identify rebirth, people identify rebirth as a human, and they identify rebirth in somewhere close to them and so on, and that's where their attachments lie. So according to Buddhism, you can be reborn in completely different forms. You can be reborn as a fish. right? But if you've been reborn in this realm and you were a fish in the past life, what is your fish memory? Right? I mean, it's hard to say. Right? I mean, if you have, maybe you love to swim, but it'd be hard to say, right? You couldn't really recognize it. Maybe it affects how you dream, or a memory that you had when you were a child, or something like that. But maybe you got fear of sharks. I don't know. But we can know things because we're only when they're really something that's kind of familiar. So I think that yes, that is definitely true, but it's not explicitly stated in the suttas, but I think it's something that certainly makes sense in terms of how the suttas talk about rebirth. Yeah.
We've had infinite past lives.
Yes.
Is there any sort of mechanism that determines which lives are likely to influence our current life? The most recent ones, or something else?
Okay, so the question is, if we've had countless past lives, how do we know which ones are going to influence this life? So generally speaking, proximity matters. So usually if it's the immediately preceding life, then the karma from that life will determine what happens in this life, or some kind of powerful karma from preceding, which might be either something that's inherently powerful, inherently strong karma, for either good or bad, or it might be something which is habitual and repeated over many lifetimes, and then that can then carry forward as well. And if none of those things apply, then it could be pretty much anything. Yeah. Like Sariputta, who used to jump over puddles, and the monks were complaining, how can Sariputta, who's supposed to be a senior monk, what's he doing jumping over puddles? And the Buddha said, don't worry, he was reborn as a monkey for 100 past lives. We can give him a pass on that one. Yes.
The fact that the more recent lives are more influential, does it have something to do with that, like stuff about karma already being resolved from earlier ones? Is that related, or? So
if the immediate ones are more powerful, does that mean the karma from the previous lifetimes has already been resolved? Maybe, but I tend to think that karma is like we make a lot more than we spend, typically. So we tend to have a lot in our karma banks, and yeah, I don't know, but typically it's like anything, right? You're more affected by things that you said yesterday than you are by things you said last year. So yeah.
But you said about Sankhara,
Correct, yeah.
It's about radio mind to go means that like divine form.
Yeah, you can. The Buddha wasn't saying necessarily that you should. I mean, I think the reason that the Buddha, sorry, I should repeat the question for the online, but the question was about Sankhara Sutta, about where you can make a wish or an aspiration and then get reborn in accordance with that. And I think the reason why the Buddha taught us don't get reborn anywhere, right? And there's only one sutta where he really talks about this. But I think the reason that he did it was because it's something that people are interested in, right? So sometimes it's a way that you can hook people into it. People did in fact want to get reborn in these different realms or these different gods. And so the Buddha said, okay, if you want to do that, this is how you do it. And then, okay, but you need the good karma to be able to do that. Well, how do you get the good karma? Oh, you need to keep precepts. Okay, so now you've got them keeping precepts. So that's a win. So this is, to me, that's the reason for that sutta. Yeah.
Because my grandma taught me this sutta, and
did she?
So every night before I sleep, I read Devatan.
Okay.
I don't sleep.
Nice. And so Kaushal was taught this by his grandma, and every night does the recollection of the devas. Do you have any favorite realms that you want to go to? You want to go to the Brahma realms, okay? Not unambitious. Okay. No worries, we can help out with that. So if you stay here for the rest of the retreat, get a few jhanas, then it'll be good. Okay, easy. Yeah.
Does the clarity of your mind have any influence on what happens after you die? Like certain people, or a lot of people die, you know, in a lot of pain and they have morphine.
Right.
So they are not really aware anymore when they die. Does that have any?
Yeah, good question. Thank you. So the question was, does the clarity of your mind affect how you get reborn? No, not really. And this is a misunderstanding of how the process of rebirth happens. The process of rebirth is not determined by the state of your mind. It's determined by your karma. And so if your karma is, oh, I'm going to shoot up with some heroin because I like taking heroin, then that's your karma and that's going to affect your rebirth. But if you're suffering from great pain and you take a painkiller, even it might be the same drug, then it's a different karma, it's a different reason for taking it. So it's your karma that affects your rebirth, not your state of mind. Now, this is widely misunderstood and widely mistaught in Buddhism. So I'm just going to kind of linger on this just for a minute. In certain cases, the karma that you make around the time of death is going to influence your rebirth. All right, but this is normally not the case. It's only the case in certain exceptional circumstances. And in fact, in the suttas, it's the case in two instances. Number one, where a soldier goes into the war with his mind full of hate, thinking only of death. And if in that moment, then he dies, then he will, well, let's not say where he's going, but anyway, not somewhere very happy. So that's one. You can see that at that time, he's actually making really strong bad karma at the time of death. Or another instance with Dhananjani, the corrupt tax collector, who was taught by Sariputta on his death and who renounced his corrupt ways and developed meditation on his death, got a good rebirth because of that. So again, this is not somebody who just had a random or passing thought at the time of death. This is somebody who had a complete moral change in heart and develop profound meditation at the time of death. So if that's the case, then sure, that's going to affect your death because that's a strong karma that you're making at that time. Most people are not making strong karma at the time of death. In fact, most people are not making any karma at all. Most people are just lying in the hospital bed, not really doing anything much. And that's really not going to get you reborn. Or if you die in a car crash, you're just driving down to the shop to buy a carton of milk and you have a car crash, you're not really making that much strong karma at that time. So if you're dying and you're in your hospital bed and you're lying in your hospital bed and you're planning to get reborn in your next life, to get vengeance upon all your enemies and to visit pain and suffering upon them for 7 lifetimes in the future, then yes, sure. That's going to affect your rebirth because you're making strong mental karma at that time. But most people are not really doing that. So remember, it's karma that determines your rebirth and not the state of your mind at that time. So don't be afraid to get like painkillers or something like that if you need to at the time of death. It's common when people are dying, it's common that they're going to be encouraged to like do some meditation and these kinds of things. And so that's good to try and support people so they have a good state of mind at that time. Yeah, you know, these things only have a limited benefit. Little anecdote from when I was in Thailand, there was one long-term Upasika there, laywoman who was dying. Her daughter was sitting beside her on her deathbed and she was lying there, breathing her last and just like slowly passing away. And the daughter was beside her and so faithful and so dutiful and saying, "Mother, please remember the Buddha, remember the Buddha, keep your mind with the Buddha, keep your mindfulness, keep your mind with the Buddha." And the mother's last words to her daughter were, "Could you please be quiet? I'm trying to meditate." So, yeah.
One's life, the karma, right?
Is taking one's own life bad karma? Is that the question, or do you have more on that? Okay.
It was also my question.
Well, what do you think?
I have sensation that euthanasia is different from S4.
Right? Yeah.
Maybe yes, the split mind explains the question.
Yeah. Yeah. So the so the suggestion was made that euthanasia is different from suicide. Sorry, did we still have sound? Just go.
No,
Sound just went off.
batteries are beside you.
Batteries are beside me. I'll just put this back in the case. I've got to be optimistic. All right, lights back on again now. How are we going? Do we have sound? We good? Okay. Where were we? Oh, yeah, suicide, euthanasia. What do you guys think? It's a difficult one, isn't it? I mean, I definitely think there's a difference between like euthanasia and suicide, right? But even euthanasia itself is complex. Sorry, even suicide itself is complex because people kill themselves for all kinds of different reasons and different circumstances. It's not like there's just one thing, right? What do you guys think?
It depends on the intention.
Depends on your intention, okay? Such as?
Well, in some countries, people don't have access to water. And we have from like cancer patients. You know.
Okay.
The intention is to stop this severe suffering.
Right, right. So yeah, in some places people don't have painkillers, so they're in a lot of agony at the time of death, and sometimes you're just in agony and there's no real prospect for anything else, for recovery or anything like that. Yeah.
Surely you want to die because you suffer from some reason, right?
Yeah.
You don't want to die because you're happy.
Sure.
You
Yeah.
want to die because you have no reason, you see no sense.
Yeah.
It can be physical pain.
Right.
Yeah, mother of my friend, she died because she was highly addicted to alcohol and she couldn't resist. And at one point, she didn't want to live anymore. She didn't kill herself, but she stopped to eat. Like, she stopped to basically everything.
Mm.
So at the end, she just died.
Mm.
She wanted to die.
Mm.
So yeah, there can be suicide, euthanasia.
Right.
Yeah, it's very complex.
It's very complex, yeah. Sometimes if we, as a society, if we don't, I mean, if we make humane options to people available, then if they don't have a humane option, then they're going to do something else, something inhumane. We did a Buddhist conference a few years ago in Australia, and at that time there was some controversy about this point because in Northern Territory, on part of Australia, they'd introduced legislation legalising voluntary euthanasia, and that charge was led by a man called Dr. Philip Nitsky, and the first person that he administered that to was a Buddhist, as it happened, and so that sort of got into the news cycle in Australia, and so Ajahn Brahm, we did a conference at Ajahn Brahm's with Ajahn Brahm's Society, and Ajahn Brahm wanted to invite him to come and give a talk, so we gave a panel with he and a number of other people on that topic, just to try to talk about it. It was interesting listening to him talking because he was so deeply compassionate and he cared so much about his patients, and you could see that like he was a doctor. He wasn't somebody who had a particular moral or philosophical point of view as such. You know, he wasn't like being all abstract about it. He was just saying that these people are just hurting and sometimes there's nothing you can do. So he just felt that should be an option that they should have. Yeah, yeah, it's a complex situation. Some of you may know there's a very well-known Swedish meditation teacher, Bjorn Natthiko. Did you meet him? You didn't meet him, you know of him. Did anyone else know Bjorn? Huh? You knew him? You know him personally?
No.
No of him, yeah. Anyone else? No. He was kind of a rock star in Sweden. Yeah, Bjorn Natthiko.
Yeah, I know, but
Natthiko. You read his book? Yeah. And he became like super popular teaching meditation and so on in Sweden for a while. And he was very sick. He had a terminal illness. And I knew him quite well. We were young monks together. He was like the cohort above me at what Anachart. He ordained just the year before me. And so we were kind of good mates for a few years in Thailand. And yeah, he was always very sincere, very humble, and funny. And yeah, he kept on staying close to the Dharma for his whole life. And then he had this terminal illness and eventually decided then to end his own life. And so did that together with his friends and so on, and kind of documented the process and talked about it and wrote that book about it as well. So yeah, I think that's really interesting to reflect on that. If anybody's interested, to cover his experience. Yeah.
People who commit suicide that do not have a physical illness. Usually it's not that they want to die.
Right.
Usually it's that they just want their suffering to end.
Right. Yeah.
And that's the only way that they can see
right.
So I cannot see how that might be bad karma.
So the point was made that when people commit suicide, that it's not that they want to die, but they want suffering to end. And so how is that bad karma? I mean, I think, yeah, again, it seems to be so complex. I mean, some people kill themselves because their share prices dropped. Yeah. Or because she said no. Or because they're going to find out what you did. Or because of all of these kinds of reasons. So there's a lot of reasons why people do it. There's a lot of reasons when people will do it. And if they're stopped, then they can get past it quite readily and move on and actually have good lives after that. So again, it's a kind of complex situation. So look, generally, from a Buddhist point of view, obviously killing, number one precept, don't do it. Killing human beings, don't do it. You're a human being, don't kill yourself. That's pretty straightforward, right? But with all of these moral rules and moral precepts, then they're more complex than they initially seem. There are a couple of instances in the suttas where enlightened monks, arahant monks, fully enlightened monks, kill themselves. And these cases are where they are in the final throes of a painful terminal illness. They have no hope for recovery, no treatment, and all they've got is pain and then death. That's it. And so they, as the idiom goes, they use the knife or they commit suicide to ease their passing that way. And the Buddha says in those cases that they're blameless. So this occurs in a couple of suttas. Now, these passages have been often interpreted, often over-interpreted, and are quite controversial. Even a number of years ago, about 10 years ago or so, the Russian Sutta website got shut down by the Russian government because of these suttas. So there was such an epidemic of suicide because of alcoholism and depression in Russia that the government was just shutting down any website that even mentioned the word suicide. And so these things are usually interpreted, okay? So the usual interpretation of that is that suicide's okay if you're a arahant. So if you're fully enlightened and you decide to commit suicide, then it's blameless because you can't do anything blameworthy. Okay? That's the normal interpretation. Okay? However, there is another interpretation which turns that moral logic on its head. It's not blameless because the arahants do it. The arahants do it because it is blameless. Right? And that they chose to do it because they knew that there wasn't any bad karma. Obviously, as enlightened beings, they're not getting reborn anyway. So you can't make any bad karma. So it's just lie there and experience agony for a while and then die, or die a bit quicker. So for those of us who are not, wait, what do we say about patience? Just give me a moment, I'll get around to it. So for those of us who are not arahants, then we are going to get reborn. And so the question of karma that we make at that time does matter. So I think that those particular instances are not as cut and dried as they're often seen in the traditions. And certainly in the case of somebody who decides to commit voluntary euthanasia in those kind of highly distressing circumstances, certainly, personally, I would not judge them and I would support them in their decision. The Buddha spoke about 4 kinds of karma. There's black karma, there's white karma, there's black and white karma, and there's neither black nor white karma. So the black and white karma is where you do something that's both good and bad. So taking a life is bad, but easing suffering is good. And so in those kinds of cases, it's difficult to make a really hard and fast decision. And from my personal perspective would be to support somebody if they're making that decision in clear mind with and reflection. You know, whether it's actually right or wrong is not up for me to decide. Yes.
I'm sorry for the continuation.
Not at all.
Did you mention something about the ending of the stream of consciousness?
Yes. Well, the ending of the stream of consciousness happens when the Buddha or an arahant, a fully enlightened being, dies. And then their stream of consciousness is not established anywhere, which is in fact what happened when those arahants committed suicide. And Mara comes along and goes around looking for their consciousness. And the Buddha said he's not going to find it because their consciousness has not been established anyway.
Now, particularly for Buddha or we know are the stream of consciousness.
Right.
What will happen if there's no more consciousness?
There is. What do you mean if there's no more consciousness? That just turns off your brain. It doesn't turn off your consciousness. Then you just get reborn somewhere.
Everyone's enlightened.
If everyone's enlightened, it's like a party, I guess.
Imagine the soul galaxy swallowed up in the black hole in the universe.
Right? Right? It'd be awesome. Is that what you mean? I'm not quite sure what you're asking about.
This whole process of being reborn,
Yeah.
and we were celebrating. What's the whole point of it? And it's like, is somebody watching from far away, like we are some kind of experiment? Or, I mean, because I think this whole process has been going on longer than we know.
For a while, yeah.
So, yeah, it's just like that. Is this all, yeah.
Okay, so are we an experiment that somebody is just watching over? No. Okay, from a Buddhist point of view, no, we are not an experiment, we are the actual thing. I remember reading a science fiction story about that once, and they were doing like this research and so on, into the brain or something like that, and they discovered to their horror that we were in fact an experiment, and we'd been started, and the purpose of the experiment was to understand the nature of humor. Yeah, so that's why we enjoy humor. And as soon as he realized that, the experiment was over and they switched it off. So no, from a Buddhist point of view, no, that's not going to happen. So consciousness continues, stream of consciousness continues because it's driven by craving. Craving causes karma. Karma causes that consciousness to continue. It will transform and change within one lifetime, within one day, and it will change and continue through lifetime after lifetime after lifetime until you practice the Noble Eightfold Path and realize freedom, and then you can let go. Yeah. Yes. Yes. You.
Buddha announced the Dhamma that he was going to die in 2
Right.
Was it his the brain to die? Or it just knew the time coming on?
Okay, so the Buddha in the sutta, so there's a long, detailed account of the Buddha's last days called the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, and in that discourse, the Buddha is said to have announced 3 months before that he was going to die, and the account it seems to be, and so the question is whether he kind of knew that he was going to die, or whether he decided that he would die and sort of made it happen. And the account is kind of a bit ambiguous on that, and it seemed like kind of a bit of both. I think he knew that his time was up, and then he decided, okay, let's make it that day. And so then he could tell people that he was going to pass away on that day and make sure that people could gather around and so on. He could give his last teachings and things like that. So I think that he knew he was going to die anyway around that time, and then just decided to die on that day. Yeah. And this does seem to be something that people are able to do. Like there's a number of accounts of monastics and meditators who seem to be able to know when their time is up. When I was I spent a year in Ipoh in Malaysia, and near where we stayed, there was a Chinese temple at the top of the hill. And it was just before I heard this story, before I was there was an old Chinese monk who was living there, just by himself, a meditation, staying and practicing there. And one layman who used to go up the hill every couple of days and see the monk and check if he needed anything. And one day he goes up there, and the monk was just sitting beside his shower, cross-legged, dead. And he'd obviously just realized when he was having a bath that he was going to die. So he sat meditation next to the shower and just sat there and meditated till he died. Yeah. So that's pretty cool, right? So this sutta we're dealing is about like proliferation, and about how you just go off on a million tangents of things when we forget oh, sorry, yes, Suzanne, question. Which I'm sure is going to be meaningful and pertinent and relevant, absolutely. Yeah.
Does something remain after consciousness ends without restarting?
Without remainder?
Yeah.
No.
And then follow-up question. So as I understand it, when Arahant dies, there's nothing after that?
Yes.
Why is nothingness preferred to infinity of so-soness?
Why is nothing preferred to an infinity of so-soness? Why should nothingness be preferred to an infinity of so-soness? Well, as far as I'm aware, no one's complained who's got enlightenment. So they seem to think that it's good. I mean, these are profound questions and profound questions of meaning, which, I mean, we can talk about that from a philosophical perspective and so on. But my favorite sutta on that topic was a sutta given, I think it might have been by Sariputta, correctly. Basically, he explains it in terms of gradual cessation. So when we have been meditating, when you've been sitting down to meditate, when you begin to meditate, you've let go of a lot of things. And in coming here, actually a lot of things have ceased. In fact, the entire world outside of this room ceased. And all we know is what's happening in this room. And then when we sit down to meditate, all of the world outside then ceases. All we know is the world inside. Then as we continue to meditate, we gradually let go of the coarser defilements and attachments and so on that we have. When we let go of anger, we feel peaceful. When we let go of greed, we feel peaceful. And then as our mind becomes more clear with the meditation, even if we go into deep meditations and go into jhanas, each time you go into a particular stage of meditation, certain things cease. And every time that they cease, you feel happy. And every level that you go, more things are ceasing and it feels better. And so you're constantly reminding yourself, oh, the cessation of all of these things is the cessation of suffering. All of these things are suffering, and that suffering is coming to an end. And the reason why you feel peaceful and happy in meditation is because so much suffering has come to an end. So that's how you know, because you walk that path and you have the faith in practicing that at each step. Yeah.
But what lets go of the last step? Like, how can you let go if nothing then remains which experiences that happiness from the last letting go?
You don't let go because of the suffer, because of the happiness. You let go because of your faith.
But still like that's not what happiness doesn't follow. But still, like, what lets go?
What lets go?
Yeah, if there's like grasping.
Yeah.
The hand still grasping something.
Yeah.
And then it lets go. The thing with grasping would where does the hand go? Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. Yeah. I'm just trying to think of a way of answering it. I mean, letting go is just a metaphor, right? At the time of letting go, like when you let go, there are things that, you still exist, right? You're still like a body and you're still a mind and every still 5 aggregates. And those 5 aggregates let go. And so when you pass away, it's not like you let go again. It's just, that's just the running out of that process. Okay, hang on. So one of the characteristics of proliferation is that the more questions you answer, the more there are.
Yeah.
Right? Nice. Sorry. Yes.
Just trying to know back to the sutta.
Right.
You asked the question and you haven't given the answer. I've been waiting for so long for that answer.
I've completely forgotten what question was that.
And why is Buddha not giving a clear explanation in the sutta?
Why is the Buddha not giving a clear explanation in the sutta? Maybe he was just annoyed by Dantapani.
Even Buddha was annoyed.
I didn't say he was annoyed. What are you saying he's annoyed? I said maybe. I don't think that there's a clear-cut reason for that. I think it's an unusual thing. It may be something to reflect on. But one of the things that you can see, if we were to read past the first page, is that they then go and ask somebody else and get the exposition from Mahakaccayana. So one way that you could see that is that Buddha was kind of setting them up to, discuss among themselves and to figure out the answer for themselves. I think this is one of the pedagogical techniques that the Buddha used. Yeah, he didn't want to give everybody like a completely explicit answer all the time. Like he obviously gave clear answers to a lot of things, but this is also part of the nature of it, right? You can get the facts given to you, but it doesn't really matter. What matters much more is when you can find the facts out for yourself. So I think perhaps this is the reason why he was doing it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that we talk a lot about suicide. That
Yes.
I love every one of you, and if you ever need anybody to talk to, I'll be there.
Sadhu. Yeah, thank you for that, and thank you for really pointing that out. And same for myself. If anybody wants to talk about anything, yeah, because we were kind of talking about it as a sort of abstract issue, but it really isn't. It's, you know, like for me, that's one of the reasons why I'm kind of, you know, I'm reluctant to sort of make abstract pronouncements on it. To me, it's something where you have to listen to a person and listen to their story and listen to where they're coming from. And yes.
Maybe if we look at this from different perspective, that the consciousness ends, and there is, we don't think about it like there is nothing, but we reach everything. So from nothingness, we become full. Maybe that will switch.
Right?
Yes.
Instead of when you end, instead of becoming nothing, maybe you become full, you become everything. You know, my Ajahn Chacha, my Metta teacher, he said, emptiness doesn't mean nothingness. Emptiness means fullness. We'll get 1 second. Yeah. No. Yeah.
And I was wondering with children, when they do some harmful things, don't we have to be the same color and the planet?
Okay.
Something.
Okay.
Or do children create conflict?
Okay. So the question is, do children make bad karma or not? Or do they create bad karma in the same way that adults do? Yeah. So I would say that the Buddhist point of view would be a bit similar to kind of the legal point of view as well, like that children have a kind of diminished responsibility. Obviously, it's not black and white because kids obviously learn responsibility as they grow up. So in the main Buddhist teaching on these things is dependent origination. And one of the interesting little details of dependent origination is that it has one link where craving conditions grasping, tanha conditions upadana. Now, craving is always defined in very primitive terms. The craving is desire for pleasures, desire to exist, or desire to not exist. Okay? These are like the fundamental drives. And these are not just human drives. Any human has those drives, but animals share them as well. And they're pretty much universal, and you pretty much have them as soon as you're born, probably even before. Grasping, right, is grasping at views, grasping at doctrines of self, grasping at precepts and practices, right? Grasping also at sensual pleasure. So these are a lot more sophisticated than your primal desires, okay? So a 3-year-old might be grasping for their toy, but they're not arguing with their mum about the interpretation of Hegelian metaphysics. That is usually like a bit later on. So attachment to views and all of these kinds of things is part of that process of dependent origination, and obviously it's part of what childhood development. You learn about those things as you grow up, and even once you're an adult. And that's part of that process of creating karma. So if you don't have views and you don't have that developed cognitive sense, then you're not fully capable of making karma in that kind of way. And so you think about it like animals or something as well. Like you look at how animals make karma, like an animal, like if you have a dog might get angry and snap, and then 2 seconds later, it's completely gone again. Like it's just moves one way or the other. So is there karma being made? Sure, you know, but it's not like fixed and determined, like the views and the cognitive apparatus we have in our mind, that gives something, that gives things power, that channels them and fixes them. And that's what creates that real kind of energy. So again, it's the same kind of thing. Like if you compare, remember what I talked about homes, like the Buddha said, like getting reborn is like moving house, right? When adults move house, quite a large bit is involved, right? Kids will build a cubby house. It's not so big. Put up a couple of blankets, crawl in there, call it home, good enough. And so it's that whole structure which creates like a powerful energy that is really the determining karma. So do kids create karma? Yeah, but not to the same extent. And in most cases, it's not going to really have any effect. Most kind of karma, most of the stuff you do with your mind is a bit of a wash, actually. Like it just kind of bit grey. Most of the time, you're not really doing anything that much. That's really kind of morally efficacious. So karma is those things that we do that are actually morally potent. Right? Making yourself a cup of tea is really karma. Sharing a cup of tea with a neighbor is karma because it has some moral potency. Okay.
I was thinking yesterday about what you said about the family of Buddha or the wife and
Right.
the family going through trauma and sorrow. And my question is, was that very practically? Buddhists said about the meaning of going through this kind of experiences.
Okay, so yesterday we mentioned a little bit about the trauma that was caused when the Buddha left home, and he caused quite a bit of distress in the family, or the Siddhartha, he wasn't the Buddha at that point. And so what does Buddhism say about these traumatic experiences? Okay, so in like early Buddhist teachings, in like the formal and doctrinal teachings, it doesn't really talk about trauma that much, I don't think, but it does talk about it quite a lot in various stories. And so you get quite a lot of cases where there are different stories told about different people and what they would do and how they would respond to trauma and so on. And so there's quite a number of stories where people might be trapped in very traumatic experiences, like lose their whole family or something like this, and who are then able to overcome that trauma. So the Buddha's perspective was definitely that trauma is real and that it is suffering, and that it can be overcome. Yeah.
And what is the reason of the suffering? Is it just the life is suffering point?
Sure, yeah.
But why is then for some people they have to go through really traumatic experiences in comparison to, let's say, less traumatic ones?
They had to. Do some people have to go through more traumatic experiences than others? I don't know. I'm not entirely comfortable with the use of the word "have to" there. I mean, they do go through them, but I'm not sure that they have to go through them. I'm wary of treating trauma as something that's good. You know, I mean, the reality is, of course, people do learn from trauma, but whether they had to learn from trauma, there are plenty of people who don't. I mean, there are plenty of people who go through trauma and don't learn anything except how to inflict trauma on others. Right? And there are plenty of people who don't go through trauma and they do manage to learn things.
Explain to a person who's going through trauma, the most common question is why me?
Yeah. Look, from a Buddhist point of view, then you would simply say, well, this is natural. It's not, there's not any reason because it's you, it's everyone. Yeah. And that trauma, that family loss, I mean, one thing I didn't talk about yesterday is that that's not just what happened when the Buddha left home, but that's also what happened to the Buddha, because his mother died after 7 days when he was born. And I find that really psychologically very interesting. because at that age, like an infant hasn't got like a object permanence and hasn't got like a really clear idea of their mother. And yet they have an impression of their mother, who is then gone. And then when the Buddha grew up, his whole teaching was about the loss and how we parted from those that we love. I kind of feel that the Buddha's, that initial trauma was a deep imprint on the Buddha's later insight. Yeah.
One last question about the reincarnation stuff. You think it is essential to believe in it in Buddhism, or is it optional? Like in Stephen Batchelor's version of Buddhism without supernatural beliefs, do you think it's a possibility, or does Buddhism collapse without it?
Okay, so now the question is, do you have to believe in rebirth, or is it optional? Okay, so first of all, let me say, I'm not sure if it's still available online, but there's actually a discussion between myself and Stephen about that, like maybe probably 10 years ago now. And we sort of had this talk about it. And for me, the interesting thing is like why we believe the things that we do and why those things matter. Like saying that, like that kind of framing, I find really distasteful. Do you have to believe in it? So what's going to, after the retreat, Wimala and I, we're going to form like a Buddhist Inquisition. So we're going to be following you to your home, we're going to be stalking you, we're going to be making sure that you believe the correct things you have to believe. And if you don't, then we're going to be getting you. No, it doesn't quite work like that, right? Is it optional? So to me, that kind of frames it as being, it's a common way of framing it. And it's a way that kind of implies that somehow Buddhism is the kind of thing that goes around insisting that you have to believe in certain things. And I know you're not personally saying that. It's okay. But it's kind of an implication behind that way of framing. And it's just not how we do things, really. Is rebirth an intrinsic part of the Buddhist teachings? Yes, obviously. And is it possible to frame a version of the Buddhist teachings meaningfully that excludes rebirth? In my view, no, not at all. I mean, obviously not. And a lot of the times the attempts to do that kind of thing stems from basic misunderstandings of fundamental terms, which in Buddhism are about rebirth, but which are often not interpreted in that way. And so, yeah, so as a translator and a Pali scholar, as a historical scholar, regardless of my own beliefs, it's obvious that rebirth is, absolutely fundamental at every level in understanding Buddhism. For people in their own practice, then people need to ask themselves, what are they attached to and what's causing suffering? And if something's causing them suffering, then that's what they need to let go of. And sort of beliefs in rebirth and so on are things that will evolve over time. And it's not necessarily something that needs to be kind of settled immediately, right? So we're not like doing, rebirth quizzes or anything like that. But I would say something more to that, and something I've been thinking about a lot recently, actually. So Stephen Batchelor is like a secular materialist, and this is this kind of philosophy which is, quite become more and more influential. And Stephen obviously believes that secular materialism is compatible with Buddhism. Obviously, it's compatible with a lot of Buddhism, right? No doubt about that. But why are people secular materialists, and what actually is going on with that? And I think that, how do I put this nicely? I think secular materialism is by far and away, the most harmful philosophy that's ever been developed by humanity. And secular materialism is literally powering the annihilation of the planet. Climate change, stripping of resources, population extraction, all of it comes from industrialization, mechanistic science, and the stripping of divinity and love from the world. And people before modern times always saw the earth as sacred. They saw divine beings in the trees and in the skies, and they lived in a world that was overflowing and abundant with meaning and with love and with connection. And you can say all you like that this is some superstition and this is an animist belief or whatever. Okay, you know, you can say, can you objectively prove that that's true? No, I can't objectively prove that that's true, but I can objectively say that when we stopped believing in that, we chopped down all the forests. And we killed all, you know, I mean, how many statistics do we need to know? Right? 62% of all mammalian life on planet Earth is human. 30-something% is livestock, and 4% is everything else. That's what we've done. That's what secular materialism and stuff. And all of the devastation that's covered, in my view, that's covering the earth, we can't separate that from the viewpoint that says we are just matter. And we do not have to worship the earth or consider the earth as alive. We don't have to consider the earth as meaningful and full of value. We can consider the earth as a bunch of chemicals. And we can get a bunch of petrochemicals, mix them up, shove them on the earth, and get what we want from it. And that's what life is. So I think we need to push back on this idea that secular materialism is somehow correct. If correctness is measured by outcomes, right, then yeah, sure, it works, right? When I go home to Australia, I'm going to be getting on a plane, and I have a fairly high degree of confidence that that plane is going to take off, it's going to fly to Australia, it's going to land. And that's true. And I'm not going to be praying to a divinity that happens. I mean, maybe if there's a lot of thunderstorm on the way, then I might let out one or two. But generally speaking, I mean, we know that it's effective and we know that it works on those small scales. But if you look at the bigger scale, it's incredibly destructive. And so I think we need to really reconsider at a profound level what it means for us to live in a world that has been stripped of divinity. Well, I think we should probably wrap up that now. A couple of people in the interviews expressed that they came to this chaos and metta retreat, and they found that there's too much metta and not enough chaos. So hopefully you're feeling a bit better about that now. And, but no, that's good. Honestly, great questions. Thanks everyone. Really nice discussion. And these are obviously like really important issues that come up, and I'm glad that we can have the chance to be able to talk about them. And tomorrow we can continue with the Honey Cake Sutta. Let's finish by paying respects to the triple jet. Bhagavato Sangha